This right here is supposed to be just a Civic. It's not supposed to be all that exciting or special or fun, but somehow it is. This is the best Civic that Honda has ever made, excluding the Type R, of course, but it's just a leap forward in terms of what you'd expect from a Civic versus previous model years. Now, a couple of months ago, I drove the Civic Hybrid sedan, which is great overall. However, there's just something special about the hatchback. It's a full 6 inches shorter than the sedan, which just makes it look and feel more like a Civic. Overall, it is just a fantastic Civic. However, it is a little bit expensive. By far the best part about this car is its powertrain, because it's kind of overkill actually. It's rocking the same hybrid setup that you'd find in the bigger, heavier Accord and CR-V, and in fact Honda knew that it was overkill, so they detuned that powertrain for the Civic. However, it still feels really quick. It's actually quicker than a Honda Civic Si from 0 to 60, but most of that quickness comes from the front end of that acceleration, the 0 to 30 time. This car has an electric motor that produces about 180 horsepower and 230 foot-pounds of torque, and all that torque is available immediately at 0 RPM, and it just feels extremely smooth, incredibly powerful for a Civic at least, and it's just a more luxurious ride. And of course, with those emulated gear shifts, you kind of have a more elevated experience, at least for a Civic. One thing special about the Civic Hybrid, at least compared to something like the Prius, is its tires. This car is rocking 235s versus the 195s in the Prius, which means the tires are about 20% wider, which gives you better traction for acceleration and handling, which is great because you're driving a car that's based on the exceptional Civic Type R. But also, remember, these cars don't have spare tires, and the Prius has very unique tires. In fact, I checked my local Costco and there's only one tire option available for the Prius versus about a dozen for the Civic. Now, I will admit that the Prius is a better looking car than the Civic Hybrid Hatchback. However, Honda did make a few changes for the 2025 model year. This is technically a refresh, so there are a few changes, but most people aren't going to notice the difference. For example, the bumper has been redesigned. It looks very different. You have some functional aero vents over here. The trimming around the headlights and the bottom lip are now body colored, but the biggest differentiator is going to be the 18-inch wheels on this Sport Touring Hybrid. That is going to be by far the easiest way to tell this Civic apart from the previous model years. The rear of the Civic is unchanged for 2025, just like the sedan, but I really like the way that the hatchback looks in the rear, especially compared to the sedan. It looks fantastic. The cargo door even has this kind of spoiler built into it. However, you do have this windshield wiper on the back, which is probably spoiling the job of the spoiler's job of flicking air off the back of the car for improved aerodynamics. However, this car needed to have a windshield wiper because certain people need and want a windshield wiper. However, if it was up to me, I would totally do a windshield wiper delete on this car to make this whole rear section look all that much cleaner. The inside of the Civic is an interior that can only be described as normal but perfected. This is the result of years of Honda listening and taking customer feedback seriously for many years and many generations, which is not something that could be said for every car brand. For example, this car has physical dials and controls which look and sound fantastic. You have a volume knob and a overall simplistic looking interior, but looks fantastic. It even has a normal shifter, which is just a nice thing to see. Now, for this touring model, you do get genuine leather seats, which are perforated and heated, but not ventilated. However, they are incredibly comfortable. You also get a larger 9-inch display, which is unfortunately exclusive to the Sport Touring model. Last time I had the Civic Hybrid Sport, and I was a little disappointed that it didn't have the same larger display, because in the Accord hybrids, they all have that same larger 12-inch display. You just don't get Google built in until you get the Touring model, which is something I think Honda should have done for the Civic hybrids. Behind the steering wheel, you also have the sort of 10-inch gauge cluster, which is again exclusive to the Sport Touring model, which is a bit of a disappointment. I kind of just wish Honda would make this standard across all models, especially the hybrids, because you do get a much nicer display back here. Now, in terms of premium features, you are missing a couple of things that could be great. This car doesn't have a heated steering wheel, it doesn't have ventilated seats, and it's actually almost a little disappointing because I kind of wish wish that Honda kind of made a even higher level trim than this sport touring model that maybe came with more sound deadening or a heated steering wheel and ventilated seats and things like that, because this car really kind of is in a class of its own. And unfortunately, the Integra doesn't take advantage of this Civic hybrid platform. I think that the Integra could build on this platform and make a premium driving great car with much more luxurious features, but unfortunately they just don't do that, and they're just sticking to that 1.5 turbo kind of Civic Si based Integra. Now moving on to the back, even though the hatchback is a full 6 inches shorter in length versus the sedan, you still have an acceptable amount of room back here. This front seat is almost as far back as it can go, and I still got about 2 inches of legroom. I'm 6 foot, by the way. Also, when it comes to headroom, it's not as spacious as I'd hope. When I lean all the way back, unfortunately, my head does hit the top. However, it was the same story when it came to the sedan. In terms of interior quality, the back does sort of move to hard plastics versus these sort of soft touch plastics in the front. And unfortunately, you don't have rear AC vents or charging ports in the back, which is a bit of a disappointment. However, if I'm sitting back just like this, my head is not touching the top. I have about a centimeter of room, which is not a lot, but it's still enough for someone like me to be pretty comfortable back here. And of course, in the back, you have the hatchback, which isn't the largest hatchback in the world, but it's certainly functional. In terms of features, you have this retractable slide cover to sort of protect your goods. Underneath the floor, as I mentioned earlier, there's not much storage going on. There's really not a lot of space here, so there is unfortunately no spare tire. In terms of moving the back seats forward, putting them down, easy to do. Grab the lever, push it down, and hopefully, as long as your seats aren't all the way back like with most cars, it's pretty easy, and this just unlocks an incredible amount of volume, making it a little bit more practical than the sedan. Driving the Civic Hybrid Sport, and look at that, 30. That was like what, 0 to 30 in 3 seconds, and maybe the engine hit 3,000 RPM. This thing is really good around town. And then of course you have handling. Jeez, this car is so great. And then you have the emulated gear shifts, which they're really well done. Whether you're accelerating lightly or you're just going all out, it changes the amount of engine shifting that it does. Like, for example, if I floor it, it's gonna go all the way to the top. Then if I kind of ease off, it's like it's shifted 2 gears up. Driving it around town is honestly the best thing about this car. You know, going around a corner like this when there's no other cars around, but going around a corner, you can just really pick it up, and it's just so quick. This thing is primarily driven by the electric motor, the traction motor, which has, I think, around 180 horsepower and 232 foot-pounds of torque. And because it's an electric motor, all of that torque is available at 0 RPM, which means it's quick. It's basically an EV that's pretty fast. And because it only weighs about 3,200 pounds versus 4,000 to 5,000 pounds in an EV, it feels really quick. And if you want to kind of snap around corners, it's just fantastic to do that. Make a little U-turn here. Wheels fully turned. What a joy. This thing is just so great. Another red light, right turn. This is like the best part of this car, driving around town. Oh my gosh. I love driving this thing, really. You know, if you drive around the city and you want like a compact hatchback that's quick, man, this thing is just great. All right, so here we got a corner, and you know, let's just have a little fun here, see how quickly it can go, because based on the Type R, this thing is quick. Still got grip. Wow, 45. Okay, we're losing a little bit of grip here. Dang, this thing is quick. That is phenomenal. I really do enjoy driving this car, and it handles just so well. You're not going to be disappointed driving this thing. It's fun, it's quick, it's nimble. Now, in terms of ride quality, it's not exactly the quietest car in the world. In fact, the Accord Hybrid is much quieter, it's much more comfortable. This definitely feels cheaper, but it's a Civic, so it's kind of what you'd expect from a Civic. I really do think that it is a disappointment that Acura doesn't make a more refined, luxurious version of this car. If Acura were to make an Integra based on this Civic hybrid setup, it would be such a fantastic car. This thing is great. It really is a wonderful car. It's quick. It's actually too quick for a Civic, which is why I really love it so much. But if Acura made an Integra based on this car, and it got the Civic hybrid setup that wasn't detuned, basically the same exact thing that you get in the Accord, and maybe, heck, throw another electric motor in the back to give it even more power, and it would just be like a masterpiece. It really would be the best kind of hybrid that you could drive. You'd probably still get over 40 miles per gallon, and it would just be wonderful. This is like one of the joys of driving an electric car, is you have incredible acceleration right off the line. But in this, you're getting 40 plus miles a gallon still doing that, and you don't have to worry about your battery range. You know, you go to a gas station right there and you fill up and you have another 450, 500 miles of range. It is fantastic to drive. I really do love driving this thing around town. One thing I also want to mention is its driver assist tech. I'm not really sure why Honda sensing capabilities vary from vehicle to vehicle, but the 2025 Civic seems to get Honda's most up-to-date system. Honda made a few adjustments and it does a much better job at lane centering, and it's able to take sharper curves on its own, where it's noticeably more capable than the 2025 Accord and CR-V. Last year with the Civic Hybrid Sedan, I drove hundreds of miles using Honda sensing, and it completely eliminates driver fatigue, which is exactly what you'd want. The downside though is that it does brake and accelerate a little bit harder than I'd like if, say, someone were to cut you off, or if the car in front of you were to move out of the way, leaving a big gap. It's not bad, it's just not as smooth, and this is something that I would really like to see Honda improve with just a software update, as opposed to saving this kind of upgrade for a future model year. The Civic Hybrid Hatchback is unmatched when it comes to being a practical 50 mile per gallon hatchback that's relatively quick and nimble to drive. I had extremely high expectations going into driving this hybrid hatchback, and I can happily say that my expectations were greatly exceeded. This is in fact a fantastic car, and there's really nothing like it on the market, which is why it commands a premium, just like how the Prius commands a premium for being the most fuel-efficient hatchback on the market. While this certainly isn't an affordable car, it really kind of is in a class of its own, and if this is what you're looking for, your money will be well spent. If you want a 50 mile per gallon practical hatchback that's relatively quick and nimble and fun to drive, you aren't going to find anything better than this Civic Hybrid Hatchback. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Honda for loaning me the Civic Hybrid Hatchback, and I'll see you on the next one.